They were trained to kill silently, to sabotage without a trace, and the army erased almost every record of their existence. While D-Day grabbed headlines, these shadow warriors were already deep behind enemy lines. No uniforms, no backup, no rules. The OSS Jedburgh teams, paratroopers who dropped into Nazi-occupied France with one mission: arm the resistance and burn the Third Reich from the inside. Three-man cells, British, American, French. They organized farmers into armies, turned teenagers into saboteurs, derailed trains carrying panzer divisions to Normandy. June 5, 1944, hours before D-Day. 93 teams jump into darkness over France. Half expect to die on landing. The Germans have informants everywhere. They carried gold coins, cyanide pills, and enough plastic explosives to level a bridge. Their radios? Hidden in wine bottles and farm equipment. One wrong move and entire villages would be slaughtered in reprisal. It started in 1943. Churchill and Roosevelt knew the invasion was coming, but they had a problem. The French resistance was scattered, untrained, and fighting each other as much as the Nazis. Enter Wild Bill Donovan, head of the OSS. His idea? Send small teams of elite soldiers to unite the resistance, train them, arm them, turn occupied France into a guerrilla war zone before the first Allied boot hit the beach. But who do you send on a suicide mission? Donovan wanted volunteers who spoke perfect French, who could blend in with peasants, who could organize chaos into warfare. The British called them ungentlemanly soldiers. Donovan called them perfect. Milton Hall, England, a country estate turned commando school. For 6 months, recruits learned skills no army taught: lockpicking, explosives, silent killing, how to organize guerrilla networks, how to survive interrogation. Each Jedburgh team had 3 men: one American or British officer, one French officer who knew the region, one radio operator who could send coded messages under fire. They trained together until they could read each other's minds in the dark. Team Frederick, led by Captain William Colby, a 24-year-old law student from Minnesota. His French officer, Jacques Favel, had escaped occupied France by stealing a fishing boat. Their radio operator, Louis Giry, was a former French army sergeant who'd lost his entire unit at Dunkirk. May 1944, the teams get their orders. Parachute into occupied territory, make contact with local resistance, assess their capabilities, request weapons drops, coordinate sabotage for D-Day. Oh, and if captured, you're on your own. No rescue, no prisoner exchange. The Gestapo doesn't take commandos alive. June 5, 1944, Team Frederick boards a Halifax bomber. Destination, the Haute-Savoie region near Switzerland. The pilot circles 3 times looking for the signal fires. Nothing. Fuel running low. Colby makes the call. Jump anyway. They hit the ground 50 miles from their drop zone. Giry breaks his ankle on landing. The radio is smashed. Their weapons container is nowhere to be found, and German patrols are everywhere because they're near a Wehrmacht supply route nobody told them about. For 3 days, they hide in a barn. A local farmer discovers them. He could turn them in for a reward. Instead, he brings them bread, cheese, and information. The resistance leader they're supposed to meet? Arrested by the Gestapo 2 weeks ago. Colby has a choice: abort and try to reach Switzerland, or find another resistance cell and complete the mission, with a broken radio and no weapons. He chooses the mission. Through the farmer's cousin's brother-in-law, they make contact with a communist resistance cell. The leader, a schoolteacher named Henri, is suspicious. The last Allied officers who showed up were Gestapo plants. 3 resistance fighters were hanged in the town square. Favel, the French officer, wins them over. He knows the region. He knows the slang. He knows which Catholic saints the locals pray to and which collaborators run the black market. After 48 hours of interrogation, Henri believes them. Henri's cell has 47 fighters: farmers, miners, a butcher, 2 priests. They have hunting rifles, homemade bombs, and enough anger to start a revolution. What they don't have is training, coordination, or heavy weapons. Colby and Favell spend 2 weeks turning farmers into guerrillas. How to ambush a convoy, how to set a proper roadblock, how to retreat without leading Germans back to your village, how to make a German patrol disappear without firing a shot. Geary fixes the radio using parts from a German field radio they stole. He makes contact with London. 3 nights later, RAF bombers drop 20 containers, Sten guns, plastic explosives, anti-tank mines, medical supplies, and chocolate, which the resistance fighters have not seen in 4 years. Word spreads. Other resistance cells make contact. Within a month, Team Frederick is coordinating 2,000 fighters across 3 departments. But coordination means exposure. The Gestapo knows something is happening. They just don't know where. Here's what the history books skip. These teams didn't just fight Nazis, they fought each other. Henri's communist resistance hates the nationalist Maquis cells in the next valley. Both groups want weapons, both claim territory, both threaten to kill each other after the war ends. Colby becomes a diplomat and a warlord simultaneously. He negotiates truces, divides operational zones, promises weapons to whoever follows orders, threatens to cut off supply drops to anyone who starts infighting, all while dodging German patrols and planning sabotage missions. June 6, 1944. The BBC broadcasts the coded message, "The long sobs of autumn violins." Every resistance cell knows what it means. Execute Plan Green. Cut every rail line. Blow every bridge. Make it impossible for German reinforcements to reach Normandy. That night, 300 sabotage operations happen simultaneously across France. Team Frederick cells hit the rail line between Lyon and Dijon in 14 different locations. Not enough to stop trains completely, but enough to delay every troop movement by days. The Germans respond with fury, mass reprisals, entire villages burned, hostages executed in public squares. The resistance wants revenge. Colby has to hold them back. Dead Germans mean dead civilians. The mission is disruption, not extermination. July 12th, a Gestapo raid nearly captured the entire command cell. Henri is killed covering their escape. Geary is shot in the shoulder but keeps the radio. They retreat to the mountains and spend 3 weeks operating from caves, coordinating operations by night and hiding by day. By August 1944, Jedburgh teams across France have cut every major rail line into Normandy. The 2nd SS Panzer Division takes 18 days to travel a route that should take 3. 50 German divisions never make it to the invasion beaches. Eisenhower himself later says the Jedburghs shortened the war by 6 months. Thousands of Allied lives saved. Team Frederick wasn't alone. Team Bugatti operated in Brittany, organizing 3,000 resistance fighters who captured an entire German garrison. Team Chloroform worked with the Maquis in central France, destroying 22 locomotives in 1 night. Team Daniel operated behind German lines for 97 days without resupply. But the price was brutal. 21 Jedburgh teams never came home. Team Cedric was betrayed by an informant and executed by firing squad. Team Ivor was captured during a drop, tortured by the Gestapo for 3 weeks, then hanged. No trials, no Geneva Convention. Their families were told they died in training accidents. Captain Aaron Bank led Team Packard into southern France, a Jewish kid from Brooklyn who spoke perfect German and French. His mission? Kidnap General Friedrich Wiese and steal his entire intelligence network. Bank pulled it off using a captured Gestapo uniform, forged papers, and brass balls. He walked into German headquarters in Grenoble, claimed to be investigating security leaks, and walked out with filing cabinets full of documents. The general? Banks' team grabbed him from his staff car on a mountain road. Weiss gave up troop positions, defensive plans, and the locations of 3 ammunition dumps. Bank radioed it all to Allied command. 2 days later, American bombers destroyed the dumps, and an entire Wehrmacht division walked into an ambush they didn't know was coming. But here's what they don't teach you. These weren't just soldiers. They were expendable. Churchill called them specially unemployable. Translation? Deniable assets. If captured, Washington and London would publicly deny they existed. Privately, they'd be written off as casualties. Donovan knew the odds. He expected 30% casualties. He considered that acceptable because one Jedburgh team could coordinate thousands of resistance fighters. One man could change the outcome of entire battles. The math was brutal, but effective. When the war ended, the betrayal began. Their mission files were immediately classified for national security. Their medals were buried in classified archives or downgraded to avoid explaining what they'd done. The French resistance fighters they'd trained and armed, abandoned. Communist resistance fighters who'd fought alongside the Jedburghs were hunted by French authorities during the post-war purges. Nationalist resistance members were targeted by Stalin's agents. The Jedburghs watched from a distance, forbidden to help, as their allies were imprisoned or killed. The surviving Jedburghs came home to silence. They couldn't talk about what they'd done, couldn't explain the nightmares, couldn't tell their families why they woke up screaming in French or why certain sounds made them reach for weapons that weren't there. William Colby went back to law school. He never mentioned France, not to his wife, not to his classmates, not to anyone. He graduated, joined the CIA, and spent the next 30 years in intelligence work. It wasn't until the 1970s, when he became CIA director, that pieces of his Jedburgh service became public. Aaron Bank couldn't let it go. The skills he'd learned, the tactics that worked, the idea of small teams doing big damage. In 1952, he pitched the Army a new unit, soldiers trained in unconventional warfare, foreign languages, working with guerrillas behind enemy lines. The Army approved it. Bank founded the 10th Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg. The training was pure Jedburgh, language immersion, cultural training, guerrilla warfare, teaching others to fight. The mission was identical: operate behind enemy lines, train local forces, conduct sabotage and reconnaissance. You know them as the Green Berets. Every A-team structure, every Special Forces mission, every unconventional warfare doctrine traces directly back to those Jedburgh teams jumping into occupied France in 1944. Banks' legacy became the blueprint for modern special operations. For 50 years, the Jedburgh story stayed classified. Survivors couldn't publish memoirs. Historians couldn't access the files. The missions that helped win World War II remained locked in government vaults, while Hollywood made movie after movie about D-Day. It wasn't until 2005 that the last major batch of Jedburgh records were declassified. By then, most of the operators were dead. No parades, no monuments, no public recognition. Just quiet funerals attended by old men who knew what those medals in the casket really meant. The official CIA history contains one paragraph about Jedburgh operations. It reads, "Successful beyond all expectations, demonstrated the viability of small-team unconventional warfare, provided blueprint for future operations, recommend continuation of doctrine." Let's be clear about what these teams accomplished. 93 teams, less than 300 men total. They organized over 20,000 resistance fighters, destroyed 950 locomotives, derailed over 1,000 trains, cut 800 rail lines, blew 150 bridges, captured 5,000 German soldiers, and delayed 14 German divisions from reaching Normandy during the critical first weeks of the invasion. The casualty rate was exactly what Donovan predicted, 29%. Some teams had all 3 members killed, others lost 1 or 2. The survivors carried shrapnel, bullet wounds, and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Jacques Favel, Colby's French officer from Team Frederick, returned to his hometown after the war. His parents had been executed in reprisal for resistance activity. His sister had been sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she died. His childhood home was burned to the foundation. He emigrated to Canada and never spoke French again. Louis Guerrilla, the radio operator who'd fixed his equipment under fire dozens of times, was decorated by both France and America. He refused both medals. He told the awarding officer that he'd watched better men die and didn't deserve recognition they'd never receive. He worked as a radio technician in Marseille until his death in 1982. In 1984, 40 years after D-Day, a small group of surviving Jedburghs held their first official reunion. 23 men showed up in Arlington, Virginia. They'd never met before, came from different teams, different countries, but they recognized something in each other immediately. They spent 3 days trading stories nobody else could understand. The sound of a Halifax bomber at night, the feeling of landing blind in enemy territory, the weight of coordinating operations that could save or condemn entire villages, the guilt of surviving when teammates didn't. Those survivors lobbied for recognition, not for themselves, they said, but for the ones who never came home. In 1998, a small memorial was dedicated at Arlington Cemetery, a simple stone with the Jedburgh insignia and 21 names. Most Americans walk past it without knowing what it means. Today, Special Forces candidates at Fort Liberty study Jedburgh operations as foundational doctrine. Every Green Beret learns about Team Frederick's improvised tactics, about Team Bugatti's coordination of irregular forces, about Aaron Banks' audacious capture operations. The names have become legend within the special operations community. The irony is brutal. These men who operated in absolute secrecy, who were denied recognition for half a century, who were told their work would never be acknowledged, became the foundation for the most celebrated military units in American history. SEALs, Delta Force, Rangers, all trace doctrinal lineage back to those Jedburgh teams. The Jedburghs proved something that changed warfare forever. Small teams of highly trained operatives, properly equipped and intelligently employed, could achieve strategic effects far beyond their numbers. One 3-man team could do what an entire battalion couldn't, not through firepower, but through knowledge, relationships, and precisely applied force. That doctrine spread. The British SAS refined it. Israeli Special Operations adopted it. Soviet Spetsnaz copied it. Every modern special operations force in the world uses some variation of the Jedburgh model. 3 to 12-man teams, language capability, cultural training, working by, with, and through indigenous forces. In Vietnam, Special Forces A-teams operated exactly like Jedburghs, living in villages, training Montagnard tribesmen, coordinating irregular warfare against the Viet Cong. Many of the early Green Berets in Vietnam had been trained by veterans of Jedburgh operations. The tactics came full circle. After 9/11, when Special Forces teams rode horses with Northern Alliance fighters into Afghanistan, they were executing pure Jedburgh doctrine. Small teams, local allies, unconventional tactics, coordinating irregular forces against a conventional enemy. The 60-year-old playbook worked again. But success came with the same human cost. Modern special operators face the same isolation, the same psychological burden, the same challenge of readjusting to civilian life. The Jedburghs understood this before anyone studied PTSD or moral injury. They lived it and had no language to describe it. Aaron Bank lived to see Special Forces become legendary. He attended every Special Forces anniversary he could until his death in 2004 at 101. At his funeral, Green Berets came from every active Special Forces group. They knew he'd given them not just a unit, but a heritage rooted in the most effective guerrilla operation ever conducted. William Colby's life took a darker path. As CIA director during Vietnam and Watergate, he made decisions that haunted him. But colleagues said he always kept a photograph in his office. Team Frederick in 1944. 3 young men about to jump into occupied France. He told one interviewer it reminded him of when moral clarity was possible. The last surviving Jedburgh died in 2016. By then, their story had finally been declassified, written about, documented. But the survivors always insisted the real story couldn't be told. The fear, the doubt, the moments of pure terror, the impossible choices, the friends dying in your arms, that stayed with them and died with them. Even today, portions of Jedburgh operations remain classified. Specific intelligence methods, names of resistance contacts whose families might still face reprisals, operations that crossed legal or ethical lines even by wartime standards. Some secrets will stay buried forever. Because here's what sanitized histories don't mention. Jedburgh sometimes executed collaborators without trial. They armed resistance groups that committed atrocities against civilians. They made deals with criminals and extremists. War behind enemy lines doesn't follow the Geneva Convention. It follows survival. The men who did this work understood the moral weight. They made choices in impossible situations, choices that saved Allied lives but cost civilian lives, choices that advanced the mission but betrayed individuals. They carried that complexity for decades without being able to discuss it. So were they heroes? The question itself misses the point. They were soldiers given an impossible mission and told they were expendable. They executed that mission with extraordinary skill and courage. Some made choices we'd call heroic. Some made choices we'd call war crimes. Most made both.
Their true legacy isn't in medals or monuments. It's in doctrine. Every Special Operations Force Manual contains lessons learned from Jedburgh operations. How to build rapport with foreign forces, how to assess irregular capabilities, how to coordinate light infantry actions with conventional operations, how to survive when compromised. The Robin Sage exercise that culminates Special Forces qualification today is pure Jedburgh simulation. Candidates parachute into mock-occupied territory, make contact with guerrilla forces played by civilians, coordinate unconventional warfare operations. It's been run continuously since 1974, based directly on Jedburgh after-action reports. Beyond military applications, Jedburgh operations influenced Cold War strategy. The idea of supporting resistance movements behind the Iron Curtain came directly from Jedburgh's success. CIA operations in Eastern Europe, Korea, Vietnam, Central America all borrowed from the Jedburgh playbook, sometimes successfully, sometimes catastrophically. Because Jedburgh operations weren't perfect, some teams failed completely. Team Edmund was captured on landing and provided no intelligence value. Team Maurice triggered German reprisals that killed 200 civilians. Team Andrew armed a resistance cell that used the weapons for post-war political assassinations. These failures stayed classified longest. The complete picture of Jedburgh operations includes brilliant successes and terrible failures, extraordinary courage and questionable ethics, men who saved thousands of lives, and men who made choices that still haunt their descendants. History isn't clean. War especially isn't clean. The Jedburghs operated in the messiest possible war environment. But they understood something crucial that shaped modern special operations. Success in unconventional warfare depends more on human relationships than firepower, more on cultural understanding than tactical supremacy, more on earning trust than imposing authority. These insights came from men who lived with resistance fighters, shared their food, fought their battles. That's why modern Special Forces training emphasizes language and culture as much as combat skills, why operators spend months learning dialects and customs, why the Special Forces motto is De oppresso liber, to liberate the oppressed. The Jedburghs proved you can't liberate people you don't understand or who don't trust you. The ripple effects continue today. When Special Forces medics provide healthcare in African villages, building trust for intelligence gathering, that's Jedburgh doctrine. When civil affairs teams coordinate with tribal leaders in the Middle East, that's Jedburgh methodology. The core insight that small teams can achieve strategic effects through relationships permeates in modern warfare. But this knowledge came at a price, paid by men like Henri, the French schoolteacher who died covering Team Frederick's escape.
like the 21 Jedburgh teams that never came home, like the thousands of resistance fighters who were executed, tortured, or simply disappeared. The doctrine is written in their blood. And that's crucial to remember. The Jedburghs didn't win the guerrilla war in France alone. They organized, trained, and coordinated, but French men and women did most of the fighting and dying. The teenager who carried messages knowing capture meant torture. The farmer who hid weapons in his barn, knowing it meant his family's execution. The railroad worker who sabotaged locomotives, knowing the consequences. Team success depended entirely on local resistance support. A Jedburgh team without local support was just 3 men hiding in the woods. With local support, they became the coordination center for thousands of fighters. The operators understood this. They never claimed to be heroes of the French resistance. They claimed to be soldiers who helped heroes fight. So what lessons survive 80 years later? That unconventional warfare requires unconventional thinking, that small teams with big trust can accomplish huge missions, that cultural understanding matters more than firepower, that the willingness to work by, with, and through others multiplies effectiveness, that some of the most important military operations will never make headlines. The evolution of special operations continues: cyber warfare, information operations, distributed networks. The battlefield keeps changing, but the core Jedburgh insight remains relevant. Properly trained individuals, intelligently employed with local allies, can achieve effects far beyond their numbers. Today's special operators face challenges the Jedburghs never imagined: instant global communication, satellite surveillance, drone warfare. But they face the same fundamental challenge: building trust with people who have every reason to be suspicious, making split-second ethical decisions with strategic consequences, living with the results for the rest of their lives.
Every modern special operator carries the Jedburgh legacy, whether they know the history or not. The beret, the mission set, the training methodology, the expectation that they'll operate independently behind enemy lines and make it work through competence and relationships. It's a heavy legacy to carry. Why does this 80-year-old story still matter? Because we still face the same fundamental questions. When do we commit forces to foreign conflicts? How do we support allies without controlling them? What ethical lines exist in irregular warfare? How do we measure success when operations must remain secret? The Jedburghs grappled with all of this first. Some lessons we've learned, some we keep forgetting. Every few decades, conventional military leadership rediscovers that firepower can't replace relationships, that occupying armies can't do what supported indigenous forces can, that patience and cultural understanding matter. The Jedburghs proved this in 1944. We're still relearning it. At its core, the Jedburgh story is about human beings in impossible situations making it work through courage, creativity, and connections. It's about trusting people you just met with your life, about learning to see the world through different eyes, about accomplishing the impossible because failure isn't an option and backup isn't coming. The real secret the Army didn't tell you about WW2's guerrilla fighters? It's not the tactics or the operations or even the casualties. It's that these men proved something that threatens conventional military thinking even today, that relationships matter more than ranks, that understanding matters more than orders, that 3 good men who trust each other can change the outcome of wars. The greatest guerrilla operation in history wasn't won by the men who parachuted in. It was won by the connections they built with people who had every reason not to trust them, by the French fighters who chose to believe these foreign soldiers would keep their word, by the shared understanding that some things matter more than nationality or ideology. And that's the truth that outlasted the classification, survived the silence, and remains relevant today. War is fundamentally about human beings. The side that understands this, that invests in relationships and cultural knowledge, that treats local populations as partners rather than resources, that side has an advantage no amount of firepower can match. The OSS Jedburgh teams, 93 teams of 3 men each, less than 300 soldiers total. They helped change the course of World War II. They created the blueprint for modern special operations. They proved that properly employed, small teams can achieve strategic effects. and for 50 years, almost nobody knew their names. That's exactly how they wanted it, and exactly how the government needed it. Until now.